Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking the movie Star Trek Beyond. And as usual when I do these movie reviews, I'm going to keep things pretty general at first, and then towards the end of it I'll do a little bit of spoilery stuff, but nothing too big. So let's just kind of get the general stuff rolling. First and foremost, I gotta say, I was really pleasantly surprised by this movie. If you've seen my other reviews for the other new Star Trek movies, you know that my consensus on them is that there are parts of them that are good, but in general, I'm not a fan of basically the way the first two movies sort of seemed like they just turned Star Trek into these sort of generic science sci-fi action movies, and that the more philosophical elements of Star Trek were kind of lost on them. And while this movie is not a terribly philosophical one, it is a much better character-driven movie. Again, everybody gets their moments to shine, and the biggest thing, the thing that really won me over is once the ball got rolling on this movie, and I kind of settled in and kind of felt like I had a grasp of what they were trying to do with this movie, the thought occurred to me that the reason this movie felt different was it felt like it was written by somebody who actually gave a shit about Star Trek. Now, this movie was written by Simon Pegg, whose geek credentials are pretty much as good as they can get, and Duang Jung, I think is the fellow's name, who actually appears in the movie as Sulu's husband, which is cool. Now, I know that there's a little bit of a controversy. George Takei, of course, was not exactly a fan of Sulu in the movie being made gay. And I think this is just sort of a situation where, one, Simon Pegg kind of like, okay, 21st century Star Trek, having a gay character, of course, this isn't going to be a big deal. And, well, everybody loves George Takei. So why not do that? And Takei was pretty saying, like, look, this is really not what Gene had in mind for Sulu as a character. Yes, again, Simon Pegg obviously meant well, but I kind of have to side with George Takei on this because, well, Gene Roddenberry's gone, so there's literally nobody on Earth who knows Sulu better than him. So I guess it's just kind of a case of good intentions, but whatever. And but that kind of gets back to the thing. Simon Pegg is obviously a guy who really likes Star Trek, and he tried to write, along with the help from the other fellow, a good Star Trek movie, a movie that really did feel like Star Trek, and but still kind of was a modern movie. Yeah, and for the most part, I think the movie succeeds. Now, this does sort of the movie is not without its flaws, of course, but the visual aesthetics and all that came from the previous movies, sort of what if Star Trek was created today, it would kind of look like. Well, I never really had a problem with that. I mean, it looks really cool, and of course, we have gay character, 21st century. We really should stop getting a bug up our butts over this sort of thing, and it also like kind of plays around with some of the more modern science. Like when we go to this one space station, Yorktown, it kind of looks like a bunch of ring worlds all whipped up together. And I think there is actually some real science on this. It reminds me of some thing I read about like the colonies, the space colonies built at the little Grange points that they were used in like stuff like Mobile Suit Gundam. Those are all based, at least to some degree, on real science. Now, I don't quite understand if you could really have things like, okay, the skyscraper, people are standing here, and there's a skyscraper that's upside down right in front of them. But I do think that there is some basis in real science on that. But hard science, fiction science, is not really my forte. But it was an interesting idea, and it really showed just what 21st century Star Trek could do in terms of showing us these cool and amazing things. And some of the battles against the aliens. Kind of looks like some folks may have cribbed a few notes from the Mass Effect games, but the space battles, the armor, and the suits, and the way people are going around, I mean, it looks really cool. And the space fights in this movie and like the action sequences and when the bad guys take on the Enterprise. I mean, that's really cool, really exciting stuff. I really enjoyed that, even if this movie did seem to take quite a while. And as I said, in terms of characters, everybody kind of gets their moments to shine. And there was a really nice homage to the passing of Leonard Nimoy. And in the credits, they also take a moment to acknowledge the fact that the fellow that played Chekhov, Anton something or other. Again, I continue to have a terrible habit of forgetting actors' names. Passed away in a really, really tragic accident just before this movie got released. And sort of looking at this movie, I was watching Chekhov, and I was like, man, what a waste. I mean, I've never had any problem with any of the actors in these movies. It's always been the scripts and the stories, and just this isn't frickin' Star Trek to me that really drove me up the walls when it came to these things. So again, it just sort of, and like in this movie, we have the main bad guy is played by Idris Elba. Seriously, this guy is a phenomenal actor and a cool as hell dude. And you give this guy this Krull dude as a villain to play, and it's just like, why in the name of God are you wasting Idris Elba's time with this? I mean, God, this is almost as bad as what they did in that Next Gen film where they completely wasted Eric Bana. God. I mean, at least Benedict Cumberbatch got some cool stuff to do. Then again, it's Benedict Cumberbatch. If there's anybody who can polish a turd, it's that guy. And while I wasn't too big a fan of Into Darkness, I won't go quite that far. There was some stuff that I did like Into Darkness, but for the most part, yeah. We also get introduced to a couple of few new characters. A new character here, I think her name was Jalen, and she's an interesting sort of character. I really wish they'd gotten into her story a little bit more. As it is, her backstory is pretty thin, but she herself, it really kind of feels like I'm really hoping they're setting her up to bring her back in the future, because she seems like somebody who's really interesting to me. And the movie really does demonstrate that she's pretty badass. And I ended up warming to her quite a bit. The fact that she reminds me of actually one of my favorite Star Wars characters, Jerael from the Knights of the Old Republic comic books, may have had a little bit of something to do with it, but probably just a coincidence. Anyway, as I said, the story in this movie, not the strongest thing in the world, but everybody's has their moments to shine. And another really great thing is there's some really funny stuff in this movie. Now, the other Star Trek movies, of course, did have their funny moments, but this one really just completely surpasses them. I definitely got some chuckles, and there were a few moments where I was just literally like, along with most everybody else in the theater, just really laughing out loud. There's a lot of great interplay between Spock and Bones. That was some really hilarious stuff. And yeah, like a lot of Simon Pegg and his writing partner, really know how to sort of play around with the humor of these characters, particularly when you're sort of bouncing, Spock's personality off the humans around him, and it works really, really well. I mean, and you can kind of really get a sense of that right from the opening sequence of the movie, which it starts off very interesting, has some really cool CGI aliens, and really serves as a nice example of just how much cool stuff you can do with Star Trek in the 21st century, and then it turns into something pretty darn amusing. And kind of once that sort of was rolling along, I'm like, okay, you could definitely see Simon Pegg's fingerprints all over this, and it works. But also the stuff going on with the characters works. Kirk and Spock all are having their sort of moments of doubt about, is this really what I should be doing with my life? And it all plays out really, really, really well. There's also some really nice nods to Star Trek history. I mean, if you're really paying attention, there's like a minor character whose name is Admiral Paris. Well, if I remember my history correctly, it was stated that serving in Starfleet was a long-standing tradition in Tom Paris from Voyager's family. So this lady was probably an ancestor of his. Things like the Makos, the Zindi, and the Romulan Wars from back in the days of Enterprise are referenced. And well, Enterprise didn't really get good until that last season when they finally got good and then they canceled it. Oh, God, God, that annoyed me. Finally, finally, the show started to get good, and then they canceled it. That and that really stupid Riker and Troy thing. Okay, so let's see. Is there anything else to really add? Um, I don't think so. Like I said, the best thing about this movie is it finally feels like the film series is in the hands of writers who give a damn about Star Trek, like people who understood what made Star Trek cool, and we're just gonna run around and have a bunch of explosions and shit. Not that there's anything wrong with cool action stuff, but there needs to be some real front and center character stuff. Oh yeah, and did you guys notice that the dude who played Matt Parkman from Heroes was in this movie? Um, and that's all great and stuff, but looking at him like, um, isn't this guy a little out of shape to be in Starfleet? I mean, I hate to kind of knock an actor for their physical appearance, but it's kind of like, Starfleet is at least somewhat military. I'm pretty sure they've got some, physicality requirements, and I don't think this dude's gonna pass that physical. But minor detail. I'm just go like, oh, it's the dude from Heroes. Cool. And yeah, like I said, it feels like this series is here in the hands of somebody who really does care about Star Trek and has managed to find a good balance between the stuff that is going to please the older fans and the stuff that modern audiences and people who are not familiar with classic Trek. Boy, it kind of feels weird to call back in the day, classic Trek meant the series from the '60s, and now it just sort of means everything Star Trek before these movies. Getting old sucks sometimes. But anyway, somebody finds that really nice balance that really should have been there from the very beginning of kind of appealing to what people liked about the original shows, the stuff that made Star Trek into a legend of science fiction, and the more modern sensibilities and what people expect from summer movies, because the Star Trek movies were always kind of more, usually, well, not always, usually were more actiony than the usual episode of a television show. Sometimes to their dismay. I'm looking at you, Star Trek Insurrection. Cripes, what a crap movie that was. But I can kind of see Simon Pegg and his partner kind of cooking up something that might ultimately end up being the equivalent of my personal favorite Star Trek movie, Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, where the Enterprise travels back to the 1980s. And boy, oh boy, was there just some absolutely hilarious stuff of turning the Enterprise crew loose in 1980s San Francisco. Oh God, there's just so much great stuff in that movie. But anyway, so with that said, I'm gonna put that aside. I'm gonna wrap that up here, and I just want to talk about a couple of things in terms of spoilers before we wrap things up. So if you don't want spoilers, here's your 5 warning. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so um, we ultimately find out Krull, our main bad guy, is this former Starfleet guy. He used to be a Mako, and then he felt really out of place and lost when he got transferred to exploration duty. And it's kind of putting up as a contrast to Kirk, who's just sort of out there doing exploring. He's just like, what's the point of all this? So I understood what they were kind of going for there, but it just didn't really click for me. And also, we also it's sort of like, wait, so preying on these other aliens sort of turned this human guy into an alien-looking dude, and it did the same for his two friends, who were apparently the only other survivors. But for some reason, the lady looks like a completely different type of alien than everybody else. And you kind of have to do some reading about the movie to even understand that all these troops that they were using were actually like machines. They weren't like living people, which is really, really not clear in the movie. I'm like, wait a minute, it's the three of these. Where the hell did they get all these soldiers? And you kind of have to like you do some reading. It's like, oh, they sort of vaguely mentioned some drone workers there, and apparently these soldier thingies were drones. It's really not very clear in the movie. And ultimately, the guy's just sort of like, oh, we need to, like, unity is your weakness. Well, working with your two buddies is what's making all of this possible. Doesn't that count as unity? And, starting all these wars, I mean, it's like, what's the point of this? It's really just sort of a guy who's like, I used to be a soldier. He didn't know how to become a civilian again, so the only thing he could think of is just basically turn the galaxy back into a big war zone, so that he kind of makes sense again, which is not a terrible motivation for a villain. It just seems really thin here. And I also got to say, I really love that bit where Spock is going through some of the belongings of Ambassador Spock, and he finds that picture of the original Enterprise crew from the other universe, and you can tell that it just takes him a second, and he realizes like, oh, here's everybody from the Enterprise, and even though all this time, like we literally spent our lives together, and we were still friends, even after decades. And that really, you can see, that's the moment where everything really cements for Spock. That he realizes, yes, there's no doubt about it. This is where I belong. And it's just such a nice tie-in to everything. You know, the original Spock, Ambassador Spock, has one more little victory under his belt. That the greatness of the original Enterprise crew. Well, here it's definitely going to happen here in this universe. I mean, yeah, the other two movies we got the crew to do some cool stuff, but again, it just felt, because of the writing, like it just was thin and flat. But here, because it comes at a moment of genuine emotion and a moment where you feel that connection to the original stories and the original characters, and it really hits you just how amazing this bond was between this crew of people and everything they did together through the good times and the bad. How much it really means to you to in your heart to have been a part of those adventures, and to see that really kind of go on to inspire another person, the way that Star Trek has inspired so many people around the world for decades. It really brings it home as to why this series is important, why the characters are important, and why, if you turn Star Trek into another stupid science fiction action movie, you ultimately, even with the best intentions, do disservice to what it's really about. And that heart of it all, along with the optimism that the future can and will be a better place, is really, in my mind, what Star Trek is about. I can't tell you how much. The one thing that I love most about Star Trek is that it's a better future. It's not a perfect future. There are problems, the foibles that have plagued humanity from time immemorial still pop up and can still, if we slip up, lay claim to us. But as a people, we have grown, that we have built a society that is better than the one in which we live in now, but feels like something that we really could achieve someday. And not just in terms of technology, but in terms of acceptance of others, of laying aside greed and working for the betterment of everyone. And focusing in on the moments and the things that truly make it wondrous to be human. Learning and discovery and cooperation and wonder. I'll take that any day over people running around in halls shooting each other with lasers while stuff blows up. I can get that anywhere. But Star Trek has that unique combination of so many things that really just makes it wonderful when it's done right. And here, after a long time, we finally get a Star Trek movie that feels like it was done right. Not without its flaws, just like everything else Star Trek. And believe you me, if you there's a laundry list of things of genuine like what the hell kind of criticisms you can level at Star Trek over the years. But that inspiration, that I don't think anything in terms of science fiction has ever topped for me. And to see that back and done right and coming from people who really, I think, understand my feelings in that regard, it really did mean a lot to me to have that feeling again, to feel that the voyages from here on out might be truly something memorable. So, with that said, I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. And please join me as well on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Until next time, take care and have a good one.